This is it. This is the last chapter in your AP textbook, which also means this is one of the last long videos you'll see of me lecturing on new material for the entire year. Because if you're watching this on Monday, what is it going to be? April 12th, I think? Then, yeah, you're officially, hang on, let me check this. You are officially 3 exact weeks away from taking the AP exam. Because the AP government exam is on Monday, May 3rd. Wow, that's coming up fast. So that means over the next 2 weeks, we're going to have to review as much as we possibly can. All right, so let's dive into chapter 16, which is on the media. Hit it. All right, so admittedly, this is a topic I really struggle to stay neutral on because I don't have the best opinion of the media. I'll just be upfront with you. But I'm not alone in that opinion, though. Since the 1990s, there's been a pretty steady decline in confidence in at least television news, and I would probably extend that to other news sources as well. But before we get into all that, let's start with a working definition of what we mean when we say media. There's news media, and that's a broad term that includes newspapers, magazines, radio, television, internet sources, blogs, and social media postings that cover important events. Then there's social media in and of itself, which is forms of electronic communication that enables users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. But both of those can fall under the term mass media, which refers to sources of information designed to reach a wide audience, and that includes newspapers, radio, television, and internet outlets. Now, the media plays a huge role in American politics primarily because of something called agenda setting. And agenda setting is the media's ability to highlight certain issues and bring them to the attention of the public. The media, by highlighting some of these issues, can also inform people on some of these issues. And when they inform people on an issue, they also have the power to influence their opinion on the issue, which enables them to try to spark people to mobilize or to get politically active. That's a lot of power. And with that power comes great responsibility to try to remain objective and to actually report the facts. But as we're going to see, with great power also comes the ability to abuse that power. And we'll talk about bias later on. But besides reporting on stories and informing the public about different issues, the media also engages in something called investigative journalism. Investigative journalism is an approach to news gathering in which reporters dig into stories, often looking for instances of wrongdoing. You may remember from history class learning about the term muckrakers, reporters that dug up mud, exposed wrongdoing, and the government and the public would often respond to their reports. You guys actually see investigative journalism all the time. Our local news loves to advertise that that's one of their functions, and that's one of the things they do. I mean, here's an example of it from our local news.
I want my roof fixed. I want my roof fixed.
Homeowners all fired up and frustrated after they say an Ohio contractor took their insurance money but has not replaced their roofs. It started with a tip to ABC6 investigators.
Brooks Droz spent months digging into the complaints, lawsuits, and the cases of those folks left in limbo. And Brooks joins us now live in the studio with an update.
So there's a lot the media can do. They help bring stories directly into people's homes. They allow for people to have a shared experience because many of them are exposed to the same stories. They help aid in Americans' understanding of different events. Many of the talking heads on cable news are often considered by many to be trusted sources. And cable news and the rise of 24-hour news cycles diversified what news was and created more ideologically driven news, especially by some of the talking heads that you all may see from time to time on cable TV. Most notably, folks like Tucker Carlson and Rachel Maddow. While those shows do report the news, they're typically followed by either Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow then giving their opinion on the issue. Now, a lot of people let these talking heads set their political opinions because after a long, hard day of working a 9-to-5 job, you get home, you didn't have time to go through all the news necessarily. So you flip on the channel and you try to get someone that you like or that you think you agree with to interpret the news for you and kind of tell you what your opinion should be on it. So a lot of people get their political opinions and directions from their favorite talking heads. I think most people recognize they don't have time to decipher all the news in the world to maybe come up with their own independent thoughts. So in a way, they kind of watch their talking heads to figure out what that should be. In an odd sense, it's almost like we outsource that to them, whether that be on cable news or even TV shows like Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Even though it's a comedy show, it still reports on the news, and then John Oliver often gives his opinion. And that could be tricky because shows like Last Week Tonight and even satirical websites like the Babylon Bee and the Onion, even though their purpose is to entertain you and to make you laugh, they still also, behind the scenes, are trying to influence your opinion on things, using comedy as a tool to do that. So the media has a lot of power, and politicians know that, which is why they try really hard to make sure that they're presentable. And a lot of them learned this lesson from Richard Nixon's failed presidential campaign of 1960.
At 43, JFK is one of the youngest men to ever run for president. His hip approach to campaigning injects a new energy to politics.
I come to the Bronx as an old Bronx boy. I used to live in the Bronx.
The handsome young senator has a lot to overcome. But the Kennedy campaign has a plan to sell him to the country. Now, 90% of U.S. households own a television.
Good evening. The television stations of the United States are proud to provide facilities for a discussion of issues by the two major candidates for the presidency. The candidates
on September 26, 1960, 70 million people tune in to America's first televised presidential debate.
I'm not satisfied until every American enjoys his full constitutional rights.
JFK is prepped for his television appearance. The day before, he met with producers and discussed camera angles. He looks tanned and glowing.
I don't want the talents of any American to go to waste.
He is wearing a blue suit and shirt to reduce glare and stand out against the gray backdrop.
Mr. Smith, Senator Kennedy.
Nixon looks exhausted. He's straight from the campaign trail and is recovering from the flu. He also has a knee injury, making him appear uncomfortable and shifty.
I wonder if you could explain that, sir.
There is no question but that we cannot discuss our internal affairs in the United States without recognizing that they have a tremendous bearing on our international position.
Mr. Vice President,
his gray suit and pale face appear to blend into the set.
Campaign issue. I'd like to follow Mr.
The visual contrast between the men damages Nixon.
Answer questions or comment upon one another's answers to questions.
Viewers think Kennedy has the edge, even though radio listeners have the opposite impression. During the debate, Kennedy's on-camera performance makes him look like a leader. And old doubts about his youth are forgotten. Studies will later show that this debate made up the minds of 4 million voters. 3 million vote for Kennedy.
I mean, who would have thought that the collar of the man's suit would have made a difference politically? But it did. Kennedy was smart enough to realize that, as well as his campaign staff. But since then, politicians have realized that they need to have a good media presence, that they kind of need the media, and the media also realizes they need them. It's almost a symbiotic relationship, but that started to change in recent years. Just like how back then TV was a game changer in politics, in our day and age, social media has been the game changer in politics. And you can see on this chart that a lot more people are starting to get their news from the internet. That has risen rapidly while also changing the game a bit, because as Donald Trump proved, the media could have a very poor opinion of you, but with social media, you can still get your message out there to millions and millions of people, and it's unfiltered through media where they can't edit it or try to interpret it in a certain way. It's you speaking directly to people. So now social media is a super powerful tool, and that should kind of show you with the whole controversy surrounding banning President Trump from Twitter. Undoubtedly, it's going to impact his ability to run in 2024 as effectively as he did in 2016. Social media has also impacted citizens' ability to report the news, because if someone films something that happens at a riot or something and they post it on social media, it doesn't give a newsroom the chance to get that footage and then edit it into parts that might make them further their own agenda. Now, TV and radio, and to a lesser extent social media, all of those things are regulated by the federal government through the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, which is part of the executive branch and the federal bureaucracy. The FCC requires anyone who's going to broadcast on TV or radio to get a license with them and to pay permits and fees. The original intention was to make sure that whatever was being broadcast on the airwaves was suitable for children, and some people also wanted it there so that they could be sure that whoever was broadcasting on radio and TV was giving all political viewpoints a fair shake. But in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, when there was a large push to deregulate a lot of things, they also began to deregulate the media industry. The FCC began to cut back on some of the regulation. The results of the FCC's deregulation really depend on who you ask. Most liberals you ask are going to say the FCC's deregulation has caused media consolidation. Media consolidation is the concentration of ownership of the media into fewer and fewer corporations. And you can see that illustrated in this chart here, where you can see all these major companies like Disney, NBC, and CBS, and all the big TV networks that those companies own. A lot of people don't realize that ESPN is technically owned by Disney, as is ABC. People don't realize that Hulu and the Weather Channel are technically owned by NBC. So even when you're flipping through the TV guide and you see all these different options for different channels to watch, or you're looking at all these different streaming services that are starting to pop up now, all of those different channels or companies that are making streaming services have parent companies, and all those parent companies are kind of connected together into a big few. Those on the right will argue that deregulation combined with technological advances has given consumers more choice actually when it comes to media. Some of the other major streaming platforms you don't see on that chart include Netflix, Sling, YouTube TV, Fubo, heck, even podcasts as well that you can get on Apple, and even Amazon has their own streaming service. Many of these streaming services are creating their own news shows or entertainment news shows that report on the news. And as many of you know, on YouTube, anyone can get on there and share the news or try to educate people on a topic, like me. So ultimately, there are still a handful of companies that hold most of the power in the world of media, but that's starting to change a little bit as they're getting challenged with other companies trying to introduce streaming services as technology continues to advance. What that's going to look like 20, 30, 40 years from now, I have no idea. But as that technology continues to increase, you're going to see more citizen journalism, which has been supported by the development of social media outlets in the internet age. And you're also going to see more shows that are trying to entertain you, sometimes referred to as infotainment. Speaking of the media and entertainment, they know that that's a big draw. So oftentimes they'll focus on the drama of an election and the entertainment factor. They'll focus on the latest polls emphasizing the drama of who's winning. And this is referred to as horse race journalism. That's where coverage of political campaigns focus more on the drama of the campaign than on policy issues themselves. And this can lead to many Americans not necessarily knowing much about the substantive policy agendas of the candidates. But hey, it's good for ratings. And if ratings are good, you're going to draw in more advertisers to want to advertise commercials on your network, which means that you get more money and benefit from that. So drama and entertainment is great. That's why a lot of media sites will try to create a provocative or attention-grabbing headline to get you to click on their article. They know that's going to increase web traffic to their website, and advertisers know if there's more eyeballs on their website, there's a better chance people are going to see their products being advertised on there, and they're willing to pay a pretty penny for that. Most people don't care about substantive policy anyway, but they do care if someone said something outrageous that might cause them to fall in the polls and lose the election. Now, we can't talk about the media without talking about partisan bias. And partisan bias refers to the slanting of political news coverage in support of a particular party or ideology. As you can see in this chart, most Americans believe that the news media is biased. Of course, not their own news sources where they get their news from, but, the other guys. So generally speaking, people agree that the news media is indeed biased, and it's gotten worse in recent decades. And that's been due in part to increasing levels of political polarization, which, if you recall, is division into two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs. That basically means we don't have quite as many people or news sources in the middle. You'll see this chart off to the side of the screen here, and this is a chart that tries to map media bias across the political spectrum. But the issue with these charts is that no one ever can really agree on who's actually in the middle, because everyone thinks that their own sources and their own political beliefs are objective truth and fact. Therefore, they tend to put their sources they get information from in the middle, or at least pretty close to the middle. And this leads me to a bigger point that you won't necessarily find in the textbook, but it's a point I think it's worth teaching you about. You see, we all think that our political beliefs and our beliefs in general in life are truth. That's why we believe them. We believe that they are, in fact, the objective truth. And you see, we often don't like it when we're presented with things that challenge the truth that we believe, because it makes us uncomfortable. It makes us think, well, if I was wrong on this, what else could I possibly be wrong on too? And that level of uncertainty is kind of not a fun thing to experience. You'll remember in one of my videos not long ago, I showed you a clip from a TED Talk TikTok talking about cognitive dissonance and how people got a correct answer right on a math problem, but when the math problem with the same numbers was changed to discuss something in the context of gun control, people got the answer wrong because they let their own preconceived political biases interfere with seeing the truth. Humans are humans. They're naturally contradictory. They're naturally hypocritical. And as long as humans are involved in the media will also replicate some of those characteristics. Sometimes they do it without realizing it, but sometimes they do it due to a sense of tribalism or a sense of partisanship, a sense or a desire to defend their party and criticize the other one. So let's walk through some examples of media bias and contradiction here. Last year, when President Trump went to sign in his COVID stimulus relief bill, the Washington Post reported that companies and households were still going to brace for more economic pain. But when Joe Biden signed in his COVID relief bill, suddenly the same move was lauded as what was going to save the nation's economy, or at least help it out a lot. When President Trump slipped going up a ramp, the media showered him with criticisms questioning his health and criticizing people for not making more of a big deal about it. But a few weeks ago, when Joe Biden slipped going up the stairs at Air Force One, the media had a very different reaction. A few weeks ago, when there were concerns over a migrant surge at the U.S. southern border with lots of Mexican immigrants coming over to the United States, the Washington Post, which is a liberal-leaning publication, said, "There's no migrant surge at the U.S. southern border. Here's the data." But then when it was pretty evident that there was indeed a migrant surge at the border because of the pictures and numbers coming out of there, again, going back to on-the-ground journalism due to social media and technology, suddenly the Washington Post put out a story that said the migrant surge at the U.S. southern border is actually a predictable pattern. So again, this journalism doesn't seem to be objective. Rather, it seems to be playing a game where they try to create an agenda and a narrative that defends their party or the people they want in power. Sometimes the media doesn't even try to hide that they're trying to go after someone or to protect someone for their own political agenda. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis was recently criticized by NBC for putting up pop-up vaccination clinics in areas that had supported him in the last election. Yet many of those areas, and if you know anything about Florida, were full of elderly people. And also, as you remember from class, elderly people tend to vote Republican. Even according to the CDC, these were people that needed the vaccine first. And so naturally, putting the pop-up vaccination clinics there would make sense. But NBC found a way to try to spin the story in a negative light because they realized Ron DeSantis is actually getting a lot of buzz as someone that might be the Republican nominee in 2024 to go up against Biden. So it's not surprising then that if you're a left-wing news organization, you're going to want to try to get as much dirt on him or make him look as negative as possible before he even gets to running for the nomination. Now, it might seem like I'm picking on the left wing here, but that's because it's a lot easier for me to find examples of left-wing media bias because there is more of it. But if you look at the media industry as a whole, it's made up mostly of leftists. Now, I'm not saying this as a slam to liberals or to try to promote my own agenda. It makes sense from what you've already learned in this class. Those who graduate, especially from college, are more likely to lean liberal. And so those who graduate with degrees in journalism and communications who go on to get jobs in these media companies are likely going to lean more liberal because they graduate from college. So if there's more liberals in the media, that means the liberal media bias is going to show more. If you don't believe me on this or just think I'm a disgruntled conservative trying to stick it to the libs, well, here's a little bit of empirical evidence to back up what I'm saying. You might remember me saying earlier that we tend to trust the media outlets that we think share our beliefs or the ones that we agree with the most. If you look at this chart here, which shows you trust in the media and breaks it down by political party affiliation, trust in the media has skyrocketed with Democrats, especially in recent years, and unsurprisingly, it has plummeted to all-time lows with Republicans. But the interesting thing here are the independents. Yeah, the Democrats favoring the media may not be surprising, and Republicans thinking it's not trustworthy may not be surprising, but independents also are beginning to lose trust in the media, which leaves the Democrats as the odd person out and would kind of suggest that they are indeed the ones getting favorable media coverage. And even those who are independent and are not affiliated with either party can see that it's very slanted. It's not that this is unique to liberals, because if the media was dominated by conservatives, I can almost guarantee they would do the same thing. How do I know that? Well, the conservative media outlets we do have also exhibit signs of bias, much like the left does. I mean, let me give you an incredible example of left-wing and right-wing media bias within the past year. You may remember last year in the summer of 2020, there were protests by Black Lives Matter and Antifa, organizations the left is sympathetic to. And so a lot of left-wing media organizations went out of their way to emphasize that the protests were mostly peaceful, even while there were things burning in the background.
It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
The protests were mostly peaceful.
During this time, the right-wing media made sure to use harsh rhetoric when describing these types of protests and said that they were violent protests. The left-wing media then said that the little violence there was due to right-wing agitators showing up to the protests, like Proud Boys and other right-wing groups trying to get the left wing to overreact or to try to stage violence. But fast forward to January 6th, when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol, how the tables quickly turned. The right-wing media basically did the same exact thing the left-wing media did.
Obviously, this is a huge victory for these protesters. They have disrupted the system in an enormous way.
You're going to see that 99% of this was all peaceful, and a handful of folks, and again, we've got to get to the bottom of who they are, who they're representing, decided to try and kick the doors down.
If Antifa was there, we need to root it out and to make sure that that's called out, because it shouldn't be blamed on groups that weren't responsible.
I heard those reports, too, about possible Antifa infiltration.
There have been reports that there were instigators.
We also knew that there's always bad actors that will infiltrate large crowds.
An overwhelming majority of them, more than 99% had to be, were peaceful, but because of a small contingent of loons, these patriots have been unfairly maligned.
Overall, Lou, the majority of people were peaceful.
All I can tell you is my view is what happened today does not represent the Trump supporters who I've gotten to know.
All that stuff they're putting on these other stations like, oh, it was the biggest riots in history. No, it wasn't. People were up there and it was peaceful.
Both sides had points. Yes, there was violence, but the violence was a minority in the grand scheme of all the protests. But both sides are competing for a narrative. They're competing to influence you to support their side. So the media will stop at no lengths to promote their agenda and their narrative, and they will do their darndest to try to get you to believe that the people that they support and want to be in office are the good guys, no matter what the facts may say. If I were to sum the media up in one clip, it would be this.
Here we go.
Oh! Great job.
Well, I made it.
That sums it up pretty well. So yes, both sides of the political spectrum are filled with bias and try to promote their own agenda. And while it's important to avoid fake news and to find credible sources, even when you find a credible source, it's important that you see what their bias is. It's important for you to understand that the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, NBC, CBS, ABC all tend to have liberal biases, while news sources such as The Blaze, Fox News, OAN all have very conservative biases. Unfortunately, America's media literacy skills are very low, and people take advantage of that and put out fake news stories to try to influence people's opinions because they realize they can't tell the difference between that and real news. But even the sources we think are credible can be very guilty of creating misleading news, which is why people like President Trump often group them in under the term fake news. And that's why you often hear that, especially from those on the right wing. So in a technological era where there's so much misinformation out there and available for people to absorb, those credible news sources want you to turn to them for the news. They want you to trust them. And so because of that, they also know the extreme power that they wield to influence people. And that oftentimes brings them together to try to construct a narrative to promote to the population. Hey, come to us. We're the trustworthy news sources you should get your information from. But it's also kind of creepy when you could tell they've been working on the same narrative.
Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about trouble and trending irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
biased. Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Ugh, it's got an Orwellian 1984 dystopian future feel to it. But you can tell they know that the public's distrust in them is at an all-time high. So they're trying to present themselves as the ones that recognize that there's biased media out there. But it's everyone else. It's not us. You should trust us, though. So yes, every human being has a bias, including me, and I'm sure it showed in some way, shape, or form during this video. Feel free to call me out for it. But I hope in this lesson you were able to see just how much power and influence the media has, especially when it comes to politics and influencing public opinion. Because of that power, government also tries to influence the media to protect and promote their own interests as a government. The media and government can be best friends sometimes, and the government loves to use media as a tool to promote propaganda. As I'm sure you've learned about in history class, Nazi Germany did that, the Soviet Union did that, Communist China did that, places like North Korea do it today. One of my favorite stories illustrating this actually comes from the Soviet Union, where a Soviet official was going out trying to promote these new skyscrapers that had been built on Karl Marx Street. In the audience of citizens he had gathered there, someone said, "Comrade Kalinin, I live in Kharkov. Every day, almost, I take a long walk on Karl Marx Street, and I have not seen any such skyscrapers." "That's the trouble with you," Kalinin replied indignantly. "You waste your time promenading instead of reading the newspapers and learning what is going on in the country." So recognize that the media and government at times can create a very powerful and at times very dangerous alliance. I hope you're also able to see that partisan and political bias does exist in the media, and it exists on both sides, and we would do much better to be able to call out not only the other side's bullcrap and inconsistencies and hypocrisies, but I hope we're better able to detect our own biases, our own contradictions, our own hypocritical nature. Because if we can do that, we can hopefully better shift through everything and find objective truth. As Ben Franklin once said,
"You're all contradictions, Mr. Adams."
Indeed, yes.
What better way to end my series of AP government lecture videos than with a clip from the series that we actually put into some of the very first lecture videos we did this year. As for your assignments this week, obviously you've got this Ed puzzle to finish. Then you're going to have a Google form, which is a Unit 5 assessment. It's going to have questions going over everything from Unit 5, which, yes, it is the last unit in AP Government. And then for the last time this year, I want you to outline Chapter 16, the final chapter in the textbook. Go ahead and outline all of it, and then you will never have to do another chapter outline like ever. Well, at least not in my class. Hey, heads up, make sure next week you check in on Google Classroom on Monday to see what the week is going to look like assignment-wise, because we're going to begin reviewing for the AP exam. So next week is going to look a little bit different. Hey, congratulations on making it through all of the course content in AP Gov.
Great job.
Well, I made it.
Now it's review time. As always, reach out if you need anything, and have a great week.